Good evening, Hall of Fame Dynasty members. And actually, before I do this, okay, it's high definition. All right. Good evening, Hall of Fame Dynasty members. It is I, your commissioner and host, Jonathan Butler, once again, coming to you live from Illinois here. Tonight, we actually have a very special show. It is the Miami Marlins preview, except I was not late, Chris, because it is 8 o'clock on my screen, and it is 8 o'clock by your message, so prove that one. That being said, we will be previewing the Miami Marlins tonight, and it comes as a very special show because of the fact that I've known their GM, Chris, for a long time now, and also the fact that they were rebranded as of late. They rebranded themselves from the Pittsburgh Pirates into the Miami Marlins. And with that being said, it'll be fun. I mean, they've been one of the most active teams this offseason, and I'm really excited to see how they do. There's a lot of confidence around them. There's a lot of questions. So it's going to be a fun preview. It's going to be a fun season for the Marlins, especially with the new logo, the new town, playing in a different ballpark. Hopefully that'll help them. And as I kind of talk, I'm just venting here to keep this going. Cool. Okay. So anyways, that being said, very special show. We will be working on this 10-part preview up to the season. The season starts on March 28th. I'm almost positive. So we have more than just 3 weeks on the clock at this point. So let's get to it tonight. We will get into that. So that being said, that being said, we have a lot to go over tonight. I feel like I will have I have the format down a little bit better. So I'm very excited about that. The fact that it should hopefully go better than last time. So why don't we start and get into it here? Share application window. Share. Hey, it worked this time for whatever reason. So, like I said, we have the Miami Marlins. They decided that enough was enough in Pittsburgh. They don't know why they ever chose Pittsburgh. It's a crappy town, crappy logo. The only good things about the Pittsburgh Pirates are pretty much the uniforms, especially those old uniforms from back in the day when it was known as the We Are Family uniforms, where they would get the stars on the hats for every time there was a team MVP. It's actually a very interesting group, very great group, and fun uniforms to say the least. I've seen them on both good and bad lists of uniforms of all time. But now we have the Miami Marlins, who, like I said, underwent the change from location and team and pretty much roster as well from the end of 2018 to this point in 2019. They've made a lot of moves, especially going from Pittsburgh down to South Beach. And so we have the Miami Marlins. I love the new logo. I think it looks great. It reminds me a lot of Vice, of that kind of setting. And I think it fits them a lot better than the rainbow color that they had last year, focusing on the orange. I love the logo. I love the style that they have here. So actually, before I do that, I want to close that out. Back to that. There we go. So I'm opening that here. So before we start the show and get into the team, we did have a little interview with the GM of the Miami Marlins, Chris Chastain. So when asked about his team, I asked him what his goals were for the team on 2019, what he saw his team doing. And to say the least, there was a lot of confidence in his squad. And this is what we had. If my Marlins play at even an okay level, we will be crowning the Miami Marlins the 2019 champions. The goal is to show up and shut up the doubters about the Marlins being a bad team. Then we see what happens. I am predicting 155 wins for our boys. That's Chris on his team. That being said, it's a very confident GM, and it's with as many moves as he made, it's better to have the confidence in your team than to sit back and go, oh, what the fuck did I do to my roster in terms of Jeffrey Loria? Because we know that we're not making any money off this. We're not sitting back and collecting millions upon millions of dollars like real life Jeffrey Loria was able to do. And so all it is for us is championships. The Marlins clearly have that idea in their head that they will be able to take the championship this year. However, as we look back to 2018, we had just as many weeks. We had 2 more teams, of course. So now, looking back at that, our champion was Keith and his Colorado Rockies. We know that. From there, though, the Rockies had 148 wins on the season with 2 more teams. So obviously worse teams, less depth. And so not only is he predicting a championship, he's also predicting breaking the win mark for the year. So that's something interesting there. We also asked the Miami Marlins GM on who his team MVP may be, and he had this to say. Starling Marte is the safe bet for MVP of the Marlins. Probably league MVP too. Even Ken Giles could play at an MVP level. Starling Marte, great pick. Probably one of the best. Probably one of the best players on their squad at this point, and we'll get into that when we do. But I do love the pick of Starling Marte. As for league MVP, that's going to be tough. After looking what he did in 2018, he did miss a chunk of time because of he only played 145 games in 2018. So obviously still pretty good. That actual Pittsburgh Pirates team is not great though, and I feel like his counting stats will be down overall. The steals should still be there. He is aging. If he can keep the power and the steals up, he'll be in the conversation for league MVP. As for Ken Giles, that's the one that I really question because he's a reliever and he's never been very consistent. So great to see Chris have some confidence in his team as well, especially certain players like Marte and Giles. Now, we also did have some comments from an opposing GM as well within his own division, and they had this. I would like to see them around the 80 win mark. I'm going to have a good team this year and would like to have all teams do good and be a great competition with the program they have. So obviously a little bit of shade there thrown saying that they're going to see them around the 80 win mark. That's not where the Marlins clearly want to be. They finished with 84 wins last year. The Pirates / Marlins are hoping to move up. They clearly want to reach that 155 win mark to break the league record. And I mean, we've got a lot of different confidence angles on this team. So why don't we break down the team and see what exactly their roster has to offer? First, we're going to start with the lineup. This is Marlins Stadium. Really actually beautiful, except for the hideous thing in left center field. Although I do believe that was removed this offseason. I mean, everything else, I would not mind catching a game here. Beautiful stadium, beautiful scoreboard, great view as well. And especially when that stadium's open, it's excellent. So as for that, when it comes to the roster, I don't have the confidence of it being as beautiful as the stadium. Starting at catcher is Yasmani Grandal. This was actually a change recently for the Marlins because starting catcher, you will not know because I have to keep my sources private, Chris. That will not be exposed. Sources are sources. It is a team within your division, so you can figure it out from there. That being said, Yasmani Grandal was pegged to originally be the backup catcher, not the starter, but with Salvador Perez being out for the season for Tommy John surgery, it will be Yasmani Grandal's job at this point. He is the one to hold it down, and with the recent move to the real-life Brewers, I'm very interested in it. He only hit 24 home runs. He started the year very, very great for the Dodgers last year and then fell off the table. Only ended up with about 130-plus runs and RBIs combined, 24 home runs, only a 241 average, but everyone's saying that he should have a slight uptick in power. Most predictors have him around 26 home runs on the year with a 261 and much better OPS. I actually like with the move for Yasmani Grandal. He moves to a deeper lineup. He moves to a much better park in Milwaukee. So I think Grandal is going to be another top catcher, even with as barren as the catcher position currently is. Grandal is one of my favorite picks for this year, and unfortunately, the Marlins would have been able to move Salvador Perez until this injury. So that's the one tough part for them is the lack of depth at catcher. They could have moved Salvador Perez this offseason. It would have been great to add to the depth of their team. Unfortunately, injuries took that away. So moving up to 90 feet down the line to first base, we have first baseman Carlos Santana. He had a brutal year in 2018 for the Philadelphia Phillies. He only put up 24 home runs, a 229 average, which was a career worst, as we've never seen him play as terribly as he did. A lot of it was bad luck in terms of BABIP, and playing in a different park didn't seem to suit him. I mean, it's one of his worst marks. Obviously, he did hit. The only other year he hit about that low was 2014 and 2015, where he hit 231. At least there was some power there. The on-base skill still remained, as even with his 229 average, he did have a 350 clip for his OBP. Excellent stats there. Everything else for for the fact that he moved to a better ballpark for Citizens Bank Park in Philly, it didn't work out for him. Like I said, worse average, better OBP, and unfortunately, he actually moves to a much weaker lineup now. In Philly, he had Rhys Hoskins. He had, really, that's about it. Rhys Hoskins, because everyone else on that team was pretty crap last year for the Phillies. Now the Phillies have Harper and Segura and McCutchen. So Carlos Santana, and plus moving back to Cleveland is a bad move for him. Unfortunately, I don't like that move for the Marlins here. Now, starting at second base, a guy that they did originally trade and reacquire this offseason was Daniel Murphy. Daniel Murphy, and this is the funny thing, is you look at a theme for this infield, and it is the fact that almost all of their infield was traded not only in real life, but a lot of it was also acquired via trade in fantasy. So Daniel Murphy, excellent year for him last year, even though he moved like a sack of bricks when it came to defense. He was terrible. The knee injury was clearly bothering him. He was still able to put up a decent line, hit 299 with almost an 800 OPS, 12 home runs in 91 games. You stretch that out to about a regular season, you're sitting about just over 20 home runs, or just about. Not the year that you would have expected for Murphy, but he is getting up there in age, and the knee has clearly bothered him. That's something we can't forget. Now, he did move to Colorado. The Colorado Rockies did pick him up in free agency this year. That's a good move for him. He's likely going to bounce between second base and first base. They may have him play some second base, but he will mostly be that cornerstone at first. Because of the fact that his defense is not the same as it was. When he played with the Cubs in 2018, you could tell he's having trouble moving, but that brings flexibility to move him to first base for the Marlins, which is great depth for them, considering I don't believe in Carlos Santana for a first baseman. So moving on over around the diamond, we move on over to shortstop, and Jurickson Profar will be their shortstop for this year. He will only have that eligibility at this point because the Oakland Athletics in real life do have Marcus Semien at short. I project Jurickson Profar to play second for that Oakland Athletics team. Clearly, he won't play third with Matt Chapman there. He won't play first with Matt Olson. Marcus Semien's pretty much set at short. So Profar should play second, which will add to the depth once again. This is a very flexible lineup. That means Profar will have first, second, third, and short for his eligibility this year, which is great. And I expect Profar to have the power. I don't expect much average. He's a very Marcus Semien type player of decent power, some stolen bases, definitely non-zero speed. But the average and the on-base is going to fluctuate. I've never been a huge fan of him. And I will never expose my sources. It makes it too good like this. So sources have to be. We need honesty here. You cannot expose who says different things, especially since it is the fact of what it was. So back to it. Let's move on over to the hot corner for the Miami Marlins. And we have Heimer Candelario. The face that he has here is the face that I think most people have when they look at the Marlins roster and the moves that were made this offseason. Nobody expected it. The fact that most of this infield was acquired via trade, via not really brought up through the farm system, and there's a lot of confidence in the Miami Marlins GM, but Heimer Candelario doesn't seem to like what this team has at this point, at least his teammates in the infield. Not much defensively, some decent offense, but nothing over the top. Candelario's been one of those guys that I expected to be better in real life than he has been. I mean, especially being brought up through the Cubs system, he had a lot of hype. Part of that might have been the fact that he was a Cub, and we all know that the Cubs are a part of that big four in baseball with the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Red Sox that get all the airtime. So obviously Candelario, very hyped prospect. He only hit for a 224 average and a 710 OPS. Only 19 home runs, and unfortunately, the Detroit Tigers in real life have sold off. They are obviously going through a huge teardown. Candelario is stuck with really only Nick Castellanos as a big bat in that lineup. I do like Kristen Stewart, but Candelario just hasn't performed up to what we expected. Candelario's projected to hit 23 home runs this year, so if you can get that out of a third baseman this as a over 250 ADP, I like that for the Marlins. It's a very cheap guy at third. It's a guy who still has a lot of growing to do, and he is obviously going to be counted on in that lineup since Miguel Cabrera can't stay healthy. Now, moving to the outfield, this is where the Miami Marlins get really, really interesting, and in a good way. So why don't we start with their center fielder and outfielder number one, Starling Marte, the guy that Chris Chastain said will be his team's MVP, and I believe him. He put up 20 home runs in 2018 and also added 33 stolen bases, if I'm looking at here. Yep, 33 stolen bases, hit close to 280, almost an 800 OPS. A lot of his value is going to be the power speed combination and even a decent average at 280. I like Starling Marte a bunch. He is getting up there in age. I believe he's 30 years old right now, maybe 31. But the power, the speed, Starling Marte offers everything. He is a top 20 outfielder. I love this guy. He is getting up there in age, so if the Marlins expect to win a championship, they need to do it now while they have Marte at a healthy spot at a good point in his year. Even coming off of the year where he was suspended for 80 games before, he showed that he was still ready to play. He was ready to dominate. He did what he had to, and he is ready to carry this team to a possible playoff spot. Moving over to right field, we have Mitch Haniger, which he seems to be very... I have no idea who keeps calling me. It's a second call this broadcast, and I don't know either number. That being said, Mitch Haniger, I loved him going into last year. He actually exceeded my expectations, and the only problem that I have with... Oh, breaking news, Jags to cut Blake Bortles for Nick Foles. I mean, that's pretty expected. We'll get into football later on another day. Mitch Haniger originally was a great outfielder last year, especially when they had guys like Robinson Cano, D. Gordon, Gene Segura. Unfortunately, the real-life Marlins went into a huge sell-off. Gene Segura is no longer there. Robinson Cano is gone. D. Gordon will be playing second, and unfortunately, he hasn't shown what the Mariners expected him to do. So Haniger, similar to Heimer Candelario, lost a lot of firepower in that lineup with him. It's going to be mostly on Haniger in Seattle. Edwin Encarnacion is there, who does add power, but he's not the same guy he used to be. So Haniger is the main threat of that lineup. I think he's going to be a great outfielder. I see him as a top 35 outfielder this year for sure, easily. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to stay healthy, which has been his main issue. If he's able to stay healthy, you're getting 20-plus home runs, double-digit stolen bases, a 280 average, very similar to Marte, where you flip the power and the speed. I don't expect him to cross the 20 stolen base plateau, but you're still getting most likely close to double-digit speed if he can stay healthy. And as I look at it now, Mitch Haniger does currently have a red flag. He was scratched for back tightness, and he did have a lot of issues last year with health at times, up and down. Hopefully that back issue won't last him too much into the season because the Marlins do need him in their lineup. Moving over to left field and outfield 3 spot, we have David Dahl. He's a guy that originally did come from a trade for from the Chicago White Sox. The White Sox were able to move, upgrade their pieces, give some depth in the lineup to the Marlins. Dahl is a great guy, and similar to Haniger, if he's able to stay healthy, can be a middle-of-the-order bat that drives in runs with a decent average. And he showed that last year, even though he wasn't able to stay healthy and lost a lot of time because of Carlos Gonzalez's reunion tour with the Colorado Rockies. It looks like Dahl will have the open opportunity this year to show what he can do. In 77 games, he had 16 home runs, 5 stolen bases, and an OPS of 859. Now, we know that the Rockies offense on the road is a completely different beast than when it's at home. And yes, I haven't said a whole lot of great things to start the broadcast, but we are now. Dahl is a guy that criminally underrated at this point, mostly due to the fact that he can't stay healthy. There is that risk. He had the rib issue 2 years ago. He wasn't able to stay completely healthy last year. But when he got his opportunity, he actually stepped up, unlike most of the Colorado Rockies prospects, like Brendan Rodgers. And Garrett Hampson was okay last year during his small stint with the Rockies. Dahl has shown he can do it. The Rockies just have to give him that opportunity, and it sounds like they will this year. So Blackmon's likely going to a corner outfielder. Dahl should have the other corner. Dahl has his opportunity, and he needs to take it right away. So that's the main lineup for the Miami Marlins. Let's get to their bench and their depth at hitting. So starting at middle infield, we have second baseman Brian Dozier. Big move for him in this offseason. Originally was a Minnesota Twin, got traded to the Dodgers midseason last year in real life, signed with the Washington Nationals during this offseason, and I like that move for him. He's going to a very good lineup. He's going to be able to run. His biggest issue is whether or not he can get that average back up to where it was. He finished last season with a .215 batting average and a .696 OPS. Coming from a guy whose career OPS is originally 768. I mean, that's a 80-point drop-off or 70-point drop-off at this point. Had an even worse total for Minnesota. He was just as bad. So we don't know whether this was just a year of bad luck, especially with all of the talks of him being traded and being moved, whether that could have affected his game. Now he is set in the Nationals lineup, possibly blocking Carter Kieboom. We know his defense is still fairly good, but his power and speed will be important to the Marlins here. And I expect him to be a very good middle infielder. I don't know whether Father Time has taken his toll on him or not. We need to see that once the season starts. Dozier's still a very good, cheap option, though. And that's what we see around the Miami Marlins franchise at this point. Similar to Jeffrey Loria. Cheap, 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 cheap. Moving to corner infielder, we do have Yuli Gurriel and his fucking fantastic hair. I mean, as you can see here, the guy knows what the hell he's doing, sort of. Although he looks like he stuck a fork in a socket recently. And I don't know what exactly he's doing with that, but it is interesting. Gurriel is 34 years old already. Very old when he came over. Acquired this past offseason in a deal that I don't remember what it was. But he will be the first baseman for the Houston Astros. Had a pretty decent year last year, barely 13 home runs, but he did have the average up there at 291. Good RBIs and runs together, non-zero speed. He was at least able to swipe a few bags. The only problem is that Yuli Gurriel does have some competition coming from the minor leagues. They have prospect Yordan Alvarez possibly coming up. You have a guy like Tyler White who adds a lot of pop in his bat to that very dangerous Astros lineup. That being said, Yuli Gurriel, good option for corner infielder. Obviously, you don't want him to be your starting first baseman. He doesn't offer a lot of the pop that you need out of that corner infielder, but he will carry average at least for that sense. Now, moving into the infielder spot, for the final infielder, we have a good not prospect, but a good guy for power in CJ Cron. he will make up for the short tidings of Yuli Gurriel. He's only projected 20 home runs, which really surprises me, considering he hit 30 in Tampa last year. This guy, though, I mean, his game is so boring because not only does he look boring, but look at the picture here. The guy that is sitting in the Tampa Bay Rays dugout is falling asleep. That's how boring CJ Cron is. He's power. He's got a decent average. He won't kill you, but he will drive in runs as a middle order bat. I don't understand why most projection systems have him at only 20 home runs, while they do only have him projected out for 412 at bats, since the first base spot for the Minnesota Twins is kind of crowded right now between he will play some first base, he'll play a lot of DH as expected, but the Twins do have load up. They do have CJ Cron at first, Nelson Cruz at DH, and they do have Marwin Gonzalez as well, who they picked up recently that could possibly steal some at-bats from first for CJ Cron. A big platoon situation possible here. That is the biggest issue I have with Cron, is does he get the playing time he needs? I think if he does, he's a great infielder with a 260 average, 30 home runs if he gets the full season of plate appearances. Now, moving back to the outfield where the Marlins are absolutely deep at, we have the young Mets outfielder Michael Conforto. 2018 was an absolute season to forget for Conforto. As you can see here in the picture, he clearly was disappointed in the way he played. It took him so long to get back starting last year because he was coming off that shoulder injury that he acquired in 2017. He started the year cold. He came back earlier than he was projected to, and that really, really hurt his stock for most of the year. When you look at his splits going from first half to second half, so pre-All-Star break, he was slashing 216, 346, and 712. After the All-Star break, finally started looking healthy going into the All-Star break. Those few days off really helped him as he slashed 273, 359, and 898 with 17 home runs in 68 games. So this guy has power. He has a great on-base ability, as we saw the previous year. And once again, his whole issue is health. If he can stay healthy, I expect him to be a number 5 hitter for the Mets, getting a 360 on base at least, hitting at a decent amount, and he has power. That's what we expect the real-life Mets to be, is power, power, power. Between Peter Alonso, Conforto, Cano still has a good pop in his bat. They won't steal a ton of bases, but Michael Conforto is going to be relied on, not only for the Mets, but the fantasy Marlins as well. So moving on to outfield 5, and our final outfielder tonight is Shin-Soo Choo. I was actually surprised that he still had outfield eligibility, but he did play a ton in the outfield last year and had one of his best years in 2018, as he hit double-digit home runs, swiped a few bags even at his age, and still had a 264 average. We haven't seen him play well up until this past year. Year previous, he had 22 home runs. 2016, he couldn't stay healthy and only had 7 home runs in 48 games. But he's a guy that he's fairly consistent. He knows what his game is. He doesn't try and do too much. Now, once again, the biggest issue that this whole Marlins franchise has is health. Health, 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 health. And Choo is a guy that should be getting some DH reps, or should be getting most of the DH reps for the Texas Rangers this year, although with prospect Willie Calhoun not showing great defense, one has to wonder whether Choo is going to play the outfield or if he's going to end up being the DH, because the Rangers did get a decent package back when they traded for Willie Calhoun. He's a big part of what's supposed to be their future, and at some point they have to give at-bats to Willie Calhoun to see what he can do, to see if they were right about their pick. So if Choo ends up in the outfield, I have some concern about him. Right now, he's projected to be their DH with Willie Calhoun in the second depth chart spot for DH. But I wouldn't be surprised if they did move Joey Gallo to third or to first and try and get his bat in there and see if they can get Willie Calhoun some at-bats. So if Chu can stay healthy, great fifth outfielder, great bat that is fairly consistent. He won't kill you, but he's not going to win you weeks either. Now, moving on to the final two spots of this roster, we have the utility spots that will be used by mostly Franmil Reyes and infielder Ian Happ. Now, Ian Happ is a very flexible guy. He can play second, he can play third, he can play any spot in the outfield. His defense will hurt him at times because he's not the best, but his flexibility will keep him in the lineup. The biggest issue that Happ has, though, comes with manager Joe Madden. There it is. Space there for a second. Joe Madden. The problem is that he doesn't have a designated lineup spot. He plays in the NL, and you have a very loaded Cubs roster with Bryan at third, Schwarber in left. Obviously, Happ and Almora tend to switch out in center field, so you don't have a full season of plate appearances in Ian Happ. And unfortunately, he started the year off great. First pitch he saw, took it out of Marlins Stadium for an absolute bomb. Unfortunately, the rest of the season was a huge bummer for him. Only 15 home runs on the year in 387 at-bats. A decent amount of runs at 56 for half a season, really. And then 8 stolen bases. He has the potential to be a 2015, a 25-15 guy even with the power that he has in his bat, but he strikes out way too damn much. That is Happ's biggest issue. Not only on top of the fact that he can't find a full season of plate appearances. The best thing for Happ would be traded, so the Marlins have to be hoping that. The other guy I really like for their utility spot is absolutely outfielder Franmil Reyes. So if Chu ends up getting hurt, they do have a backup guy here in Franmil Reyes that I like a lot. He finished 2018 with 16 home runs and a 280 average in 87 games. I don't see the average staying there, though. The problem that I have with Franmil Reyes, and I think 2018 was a bit of a fluke for him, is the fact that he strikes out way too damn much. For the fact that he's not going to be able to maintain a 280 average. He is 23 years old, very young kid on a very prospect-loaded San Diego Padres system. He strikes out at a 28% clip. It's gone up every year as of the last few years as he moved up. That's kind of expected. But his BABIP was a 345. It's a little bit high for a guy that's not known for his speed, considering he stole 0 bases last year in 87 games, stole 0 in the minor leagues in 58 games. So he's given that part of his game up for the most part. He stole bases originally when he was down in the minors, but as he's gotten older, as he's added on weight, he has really slowed down. He's going to be the right fielder for the Padres. The plate appearances should be there. They don't have an outfield prospect that's going to really push him out of that spot. And with Machado obviously playing third for the Padres, that pushes Will Myers to left field, Franmil Reyes in right. And I think he gets the full season of plate appearances. The biggest thing is, what will his on base look like? And he has the ability to slug. The kid is an absolute powerhouse. A 218 ISO shows that he is smashing balls when he connects with them. The biggest issue is, can he get his hit tool where it needs to be that very heavy power, heavy average guy like an Eloy Jimenez or JD Martinez. I don't think the hit tool ever gets there, but as a utility guy, this guy has power. He'll be driving in runs when given the opportunity, and I like Reyes a lot for 2019, especially only at 23 years old. So looking at the bench real quick for the Miami Marlins, they have depth everywhere. They have another outfielder in Matt Kemp that kind of has the same issue as Ian Happ, except he's older, won't get the full season of plate appearances with the Cincinnati Reds. Obviously, Puig will play in right. You have a lot of other guys in Cincinnati that can play in the outfield and provide much better defense than Matt Kemp can. But if he can stay healthy and be able to keep the weight off like he showed in 2018, Kemp is a great bench bat to have. Moving on, you also have Yoenis Cespedes that kind of disappeared off the face of the earth due to injury. Just like we've seen with the rest of this Miami Marlins team, health is a big concern. Cespedes should make a return this year at some point. We don't know when, but he is projected to hit 9 home runs and 42 games, so he will be a late addition. If the Marlins are able to hold on to him, then great for them. That's a great bat to get late in the season. They may want to think about moving on once he gets healthy and trying to get what they can to help their team. At that point, it may be too late with only 42 games projected to play. That will be after not only our All-Star break and trade deadline, but it'll also be past the MLB deadline as well. So he will be stuck. Next, we have second baseman Jason Kipnis, who showed a bit of a revival in 2018. I don't know if he does it, but he will have all the opportunity in Cleveland. Obviously, they trust him a lot and are paying him a ton of money. You have third baseman Kyle Seager. So if obviously Yuli Gurriel loses his job, they do have a third baseman in Kyle Seager to take his spot. Really fell off the face of the earth last year. He looked like he couldn't do anything right. Only hit for a 221 average. Did still have the power and ability to drive in runs, but he was a one-category guy of power. That's all he was able to do. So if Seager can come back, it'd be great, but the Seager family couldn't have been happy with his performance last year. Next, we have the previously mentioned Salvador Perez, who is hurt. And this is only the second catcher that the Miami Marlins have. And as I mentioned that, we also have catcher Wellington Castillo. I don't know what Chris has up his sleeve, rostering 3 catchers. Maybe he's trying to corner the market. Maybe he has an idea of being able to swap out his catcher position, but it's a bold strategy with 3 catchers on his starting roster at this point. So let's move on to the rotation of the Miami Marlins. We all know that the Miami Marlins in real life are trash as hell when it comes to pitching. They don't have a lot. Their real big guy is pretty much Caleb Smith, and he has not proven a whole lot yet. I still like the kid. I think he has a very high possibility of being a real-life SP2 or SP3 with the fact that he's able to just mow down guys when he's healthy. That being said, he is sitting lower on the roster at this point, though, behind Jose Urena, Dan Straley, Wei-Yin Chen, Trevor Richards. Caleb Smith has to battle for a spot this year. But let's get into the fantasy Marlins before we get into that. First up, we have John Lester going into his age. Oh, where is it? Going into his age 35 season. Just turned 35 in January. And really, 2018 was not pretty for him. He started off horrible. He was able to close the year on a good note, and he was able to get below that 3.50 ERA mark. Ended with a 3.32 ERA. However, his K per 9 really dropped as he only struck out 149 batters in 181 innings pitched. And a lot of it seemed to be the fact that he was walking batters early. He looked like he was trying to pitch to the corners of the zone and getting misses, especially with catcher Wellington not Wellington Castillo. I always do this because the Sox and it's Wilson Contreras. There we go. Both WC guys. Wilson Contreras not being a good framer. Lester does have kind of that issue. He's a grizzled veteran. We know he has the stuff to do it, and it should age well. However, he looked very hittable, and it's the biggest issue. This is the top pitcher for, or really is the top pitcher for the Miami Marlins for this team right now. However, looking at their SP2, who could be their fantasy ace for this year, is Zach Wheeler. At only 27 years old, finally healthy again, showed he still has a lot left in the tank, finishing the year on a 3.31 ERA, under a 1.13 whip, under that, able to get about 9 Ks per 9, so not a Max Scherzer type, but a guy that was able to go out there, eat up innings, had 182 innings on the year, which is actually more than Lester. So you could give the ability to Zach Wheeler and say he is the fantasy ace for the Miami Marlins. That's up to Chris Chastain to decide. That's his idea. But at this point, you can't rely on Wheeler to stay 100% healthy. But if he can, he shows he has the stuff to be dominant. So moving into the third spot of the rotation, we do have Chase Anderson. Brutal year for him for the most part. Only 128 strikeouts to 158 innings. Only 11 quality starts was the one that really stuck out to me. So he was able to keep his ERA under 4, but only a third of his starts were quality, especially for a very good Brewers team. If he's not able to go deep into games, that's going to hurt the Marlins here, because the real-life Brewers do have a fantastic bullpen that they are able to pull their starting pitchers anytime they want. We saw that very often last year. Chase Anderson needs to start going deeper into games. He's going to be an inconsistent guy. Does keep his whip under 1.2, which is great. He adds that ability. He won't kill your ratios too bad unless he starts walking guys, unless he starts getting hit around, which is very possible for Anderson. Moving on to the fourth spot, we do have Aaron Sanchez. This was a guy he acquired in trade. Once again, he swapped his Dennis Santana for Aaron Sanchez. Great move for him. I actually like Aaron Sanchez a lot. The problem is once again, with this Marlins franchise, health. Injuries have been an issue for Aaron Sanchez, from his arm to the blister issues similar to Rich Hill. This guy hasn't been able to stay healthy, but he's flashed a lot of upside still. He's never going to be a 10 or 11 K per 9 guy, but you look back at 2016, where he put up a 3.0 ERA in a very tough AL East and 30 games started and 23 quality starts. There's still a lot of upside in this kid. And especially when you have a pretty decent team coming together for the Toronto Blue Jays, you've got to expect Aaron Sanchez wants to step up at only 26 years old. He still has the ability to step up, show a lot of upside, and be able to anchor down that rotation with Marcus Stroman. Moving into the Marlins' fifth starting pitcher spot, we have Sonny Gray. And this is exactly where it kind of starts to get a little bit brutal for the Miami Marlins. Sonny Gray did get moved this offseason from the Yankees to the Reds. And while it's not a huge bump for him in the fact that moving from Yankee Stadium to Great American Ballpark isn't fantastic for his ratios, it really doesn't change a whole lot. But I think moving into Cincinnati will help his pitching philosophy, which originally was a very breaking ball and off-speed type approach for the Yankees, as we've seen them do with a lot of guys, because it keeps hitters off balance. Although Gray has never been a very control guy when it comes to his breaking stuff. A lot of it plays off the fastball. If Gray can find his fastball and get back to what he was doing in Oakland and stay healthy for the Reds, I think he's a fantastic SP5 for the Miami Marlins here. This is the strength, though, of the Miami Marlins staff, and it is the bullpen. It is anchored down first by relief pitcher RP1 Ken Giles. He had a very horrible year for the Houston Astros, ended up getting moved before the deadline to the Toronto Blue Jays. Looked pretty decent there in his time, but he will be the Blue Jays closer at this point. Obviously, Roberto Ozuna is in Houston. There's not a whole lot of competition for the Blue Jays. And the Blue Jays were a decent team last year, so he'll have his opportunities to lock down saves and holds. Whether he can keep his ratios under control, we have yet to be seen. But if so, he's going to be a very, very valuable fantasy asset for relief pitching. Next, we have Kirby Yates, who I think is a little underrated, especially now the fact that the Padres do have a very good or pretty decent team with Machado and Hosmer and Myers. It's not up to competing standards just yet, but Yates will have plenty of opportunities. There's not a whole lot of competition behind him for that closing starter spot or the closing job. However, I could see Yates being moved this year to end up adding to that farm system and try and get something to that team that will help them in the future, considering that Yates is already 28, 29 and is up there in age. I think he's actually 31 now that I think about it, but he's up there in age. The Padres aren't ready to compete yet, and we all know that relief pitchers are becoming the new asset that teams want to acquire at the deadline. And speaking of relief pitching, we have Chad Green and his ugly ass face. Now, I really thought he could have been a RP1 going into the season, but as we know, the Yankees did their best job of what they could to try and construct this absolutely dominant relief pitching core, and they did that. They have Zach Britton, they have Chad Green, they have Aroldis Chapman, they have Dylan Betances. Unfortunately, Chad Green is going to be sitting at the front end of that bullpen. So he'll be looking at a lot of fifth inning, sixth inning relief appearances, or even, hey, games out of hand, we'll throw you in there. So he's not going to have a whole lot of opportunities for saves and holds. And it took him a while to really lock down that spot last year. He had a very brutal opening to the season, but he's going to provide a lot of strikeouts, eat up a lot of innings, and he's great for ratios. So I can say that he's a pretty decent one there. Unfortunately, he's not going to get the saves or holds opportunities that most owners would like to see out of a guy with that dominating of stuff. And lastly, we have, as the fourth relief pitcher on this roster, we have Mark Melancon. Melancon was another guy that he is unreliable. He had an okay year last year with San Francisco, really not the production that you expected when you saw him back in the Pittsburgh Pirates uniform. He was a guy that was a dominant closer when he pitched for Pittsburgh. He was able to do pretty well with Washington. But you look back at 2017 for Pittsburgh, or 2016 with Pittsburgh, and he was putting up a 151 ERA, 164 total between Washington and Pittsburgh. He was a guy that was a shut it down closer. And last year, he put up a 450 ERA in 30 games in 2017, and still only a 3.23 ERA for San Francisco. He's got a shot for the closing opportunity, and if he does end up in that role, he has the opportunity for a lot of saves for a decent San Francisco team that won't compete, but they will play a lot of close games, adding to Melancon's value. Now, getting to the back end of this rotation, we have three guys in Freddie Peralta, Caleb Smith, and Matt Strahm. Obviously, Peralta right now is looking at, from the outside looking in, for the starting role in the Milwaukee Brewers rotation. Let's see, because as of right now, the Brewers have a pretty good rotation with, you've got Jimmy Nelson, starting from the top, you've got Julius Chastain, Chase Anderson, Zach Davies, Jimmy Nelson, Brandon Woodruff, Corbin Burns, and Freddie Peralta. Peralta's sitting in the 7th spot right now in that rotation, and unless they actually just throw one guy per day per week, Peralta would have to have that happen before he can get a start. I still like Peralta's future long term. Even in the bullpen, he's going to be a part of that nasty bullpen that can just strike guys out. He's going to be great for ratios, even if he is in the bullpen. I like him a lot. Caleb Smith, like I said before, he's on the out. He's going to be a part of the actual Marlins rotation if they give him a shot. He's got the ability if he stays healthy. He's a very strikeout type guy, 26 years old, pretty good upside, where the Marlins really should be throwing him out there as a starter, and if they're not, they're wasting his potential. And then finally, we have another San Diego Padres reliever in Matt Strahm that was acquired from the Kansas City Royals in real life. I like him a lot, and especially as a part of the Padres bullpen isn't very deep. They don't need to be at this point since they're not looking to win the division right away. But Matt Strahm is going to be a part of that back end of the bullpen. I wouldn't be surprised if he's used in the 7th and 8th inning a lot. I like Strahm. Good possibility for saves and holds while also limiting walks and getting a good amount of strikeouts. And then lastly, the two bench pitchers that the Marlins have are San Diego Padres starter Dinelson Lamet, who is currently on the DL. I know that the reason I have him there is the fact that he is projected to come back. He's going to be a part of that rotation at some point, most likely this year. I think he is able to steal the job away from a guy like Jacob Nix or Brian Mitchell. I think he has that opportunity. He showed a lot when he was healthy before, that he's got the ability to mow hitters down, strike them out. So Lamet will be back at some point, but then you have Tyler Chatwood, who will be in the relieving role, a long swingman, maybe a 6th starter for the Cubs. But he showed that he was willing to walk the world last year. He was right up there with Lucas Giolito in terms of walks. So the Cubs have him in the bullpen at this point. He's only going to be used when they're trailing by a lot or winning by a lot. I don't expect him to have a whole lot of value this year. I was surprised that the Marlins are still holding on to him at this point. So moving on, the last thing that we have tonight is the 2019 Prospect Watch. Now, if you guys did not know, these are the top 2 logos for the Miami Marlins franchise. We have the New Orleans Baby Cakes and then the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. So the New Orleans Baby Cakes will actually be changing Marlins minor league affiliates. So if you look, that's the New Orleans Baby Cakes. That will be changing actually soon to, let's see. Yeah, they'll remain the New Orleans Baby Cakes for a while. They also still have the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. Top two, this is the AAA and the AA affiliate for the Miami Marlins franchise. So we do have a few names to actually look out for. Nothing huge, similar to the Los Angeles Dodgers. They don't have a heavy stacked farm system at this point. But the first guy that you want to watch out for is Nick Gordon, plays shortstop for the Minnesota Twins. He got a little bit blocked this year, unfortunately. The fact that they still have Jorge Polanco, the Twins have Jorge Polanco playing at short. They did sign second baseman Jonathan Scope, which most projections had Nick Gordon turning into a third baseman or a second baseman because he doesn't have the same range you want out of a shortstop. Plus, the actual Twins have a guy in Royce Lewis who has shown a lot of speed, a lot of power, and great defense out of the shortstop position. So Nick Gordon should make his way into the show this year. He is currently projected to play in 20 games. He's most likely a September call-up, but he will get his chance at some point for the Twins to play and show what he can do. He doesn't have a whole lot of great projections on him, but still a guy to watch. Next, we have one of my favorite pitchers in White Sox starting pitcher Dane Dunning. The only issue that you have to deal with Dane Dunning right now is his health. There was a bit of a scare of possibly Tommy John because he did have a forearm strain. He said he had a lot of forearm tightness, which usually 90% of the time leads to Tommy John, or at least the pitcher getting Tommy John done. He's currently working on a program, throwing program, but he will not throw for the next 7 to 10 days. He's been shut down. The White Sox are going to take their time with this kid, but he is projected to start 10 games this season. And I wouldn't be surprised because the White Sox do have a need to bring these young arms up and get them some experience because 2020 is looking like their season. When Kopech comes back healthy, you'll have Eloy up. You'll have him through his rookie season. You'll have possibly Luis Robert making his debut in 2020. And Dane Dunning is going to be a part of that rotation. They traded for him. They like the kid a lot. He has a ton of potential, at least as a back end of the rotation guy. He's not a fantasy or real life ace, but a good solid arm. And that's what you need at the back of your rotation. A guy that won't kill you. And then finally, we have another starting pitcher for the Miami Marlins in Jose De Leon. He's a guy I jumped on originally when the Los Angeles Dodgers had him. He looked like he had a ton of potential. And he is currently on the main roster of the Miami Marlins. However, he is minor league eligible. I'm sure he will be moved down if the Marlins are able to make a spot for him, but he hasn't shown a whole lot, unfortunately. He's both years that he's actually debuted, he had over a 6 ERA in both years. Very few starts, of course, and he's been dealing with health issues ever since. I don't know what the Marlins are doing, whether they're taking a baseball bat to their players and just telling them, nope, you're not playing today, and hitting them with it because they want to stay cheap, just like Jeffrey Loria. Jeffrey, very similar. But Jose De Leon should make his debut. The Tampa Bay Rays have some prospects, but they are mostly relying on Blake Snell, Brent Honeywell. Let's see, who else is in that rotation? Oh, yeah, Snell, Morton, and then who is their third? Because they only have 3 listed starters right now in Snell, Morton, and Tyler Glasnow. So you will have Brent Honeywell up at some point, meaning that 5th spot of the rotation will be up for opportunity to be grabbed. And I expect Jose De Leon to at least have his name in the hat. So that could be a guy late in season, mid-season, that the Marlins do get his name to throw in the bucket and have that possibility of making their rotation and actually providing some value. So moving on, the last thing that we have for tonight is the division and league finish prediction. I know Chris believes in his team, has them earmarked for 155 wins at least, but I just don't see it. Unfortunately, for the Miami Marlins, we know that the real life Marlins are bad, and I feel like that it's just not in the cards for the fantasy Marlins either. I've got them finishing 5th in their division. The biggest thing that they don't have is really any depth to their team. They have some power when it comes to guys like Carlos Santana, Yasmani Grandal, Heimer Candelario has some, Profar has a little bit. I mean, you have guys like Dozier and Conforto and Dahl that all have the power, but they're not relying on, they don't really have much speed in their lineup. They don't have a whole lot of high average guys that are going to be able to carry them. And even their high average guys are only providing OPSs of 780, 790. Not what you need out of a guy that's hitting 300. You want to have that OPS close to 800, 850 if possible. So the offense really isn't there in the cards for them. And as we looked at their rotation, it's not deep at all. You're relying on a lot of luck. You need Lester to stay healthy. You need him to be able to locate in the zone and not get hit around like he did last year. I mean, going back to Lester real quick, he issued 61 walks last year. And the last time he issued 61 walks, you'd have to go all the way back to his days with Boston in 2013 when he allowed 67 walks in 213 innings. I mean, it's actually, I was on the wrong one. That was the prediction for this year. Lester issued 64 walks last year, going back once again. Hasn't hit that mark since 2013. Bad year for him. So you're relying on a lot of luck for the Marlins this year. Like I said, I've got them as 5th in the division. The league finishes even worse. I've got them at 9th. You'll see who I have predicted for the bottom of the league. For the very last spot, I have the Marlins at the bottom at 9th. It means that they will be able to at least stock their farm system, even though they don't have a lot of names coming out of their farm. So that's who I've got. That's where I've got them finishing. Stay tuned. For later this week, we'll actually be getting to the next part of our series, which, if I can pull it up here, will be the Houston Astros. I'm excited about that one. He was a guy that the Houston Astros and I'm totally sorry, Kevin. There it is. Kevin and the Houston Astros actually did a great job reforming their team this past year. They did deal Mike Clevenger. They did deal huge name Alex Bregman, but they got a lot of big prospects back in those deals. As you look at the to do a quick preview for the Houston Astros, to kind of give you a teaser here, they did get guys like Yordan Alvarez, Garrett Hampson. They were able to get Keibert Ruiz. They were able to get Kyle. They have Kyle Wright. They picked up Yusei Kikuchi earlier this offseason. So they have guys that are coming. The Houston Astros are one of my favorite teams for the preview this year. So stick tuned. I'm hoping to get it done, to do it by about Thursday or Friday, so that way I can keep this series rolling. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I want to see your comments in the weekly review chat for the baseball Slack, and I want to see what you guys think. If you guys have predictions on where the Dodgers and the Marlins will finish, I'd love to see them. If you guys want to join me for your team's preview and actually talk about your team as well, feel free to join. It's a blast. I'd love to see you guys on here. So signing off for the night, I'm Jonathan Butler, and I will talk to you guys later.